coverage on CBC News Network and streaming right around the world on our app and on our website. We're standing by on this Monday to hear from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who will take questions from reporters in a few minutes at 11:15 Eastern from his home. We are not expecting anything terribly new in the Prime Minister's update on this Monday, but the Prime Minister is expected to generally update us on some of the measures that the government has taken over the past few months at this point, whether it be economic or health measures. It is also the first time that the Prime Minister will speak to reporters since the Black Lives Matter protests that happened across the country on Friday, and the Prime Minister attended one of those, of course, on Parliament Hill. We heard a little bit earlier from Conservative leader Andrew Scheer and the leader of the Bloc Québécois, Yves-François Blanchet, and that special hybrid COVID-19 parliamentary committee will also meet later today. We'll bring you live coverage of that and, of course, the noon briefing with cabinet ministers and public health officials. This is also a day in many parts of the country where more provinces are reopening or moving into the next phases of that. Newfoundland, Saskatchewan are lifting more restrictions, while Ontario later this afternoon plans to lay out its next steps. It's still in the phase one of things in this province. Montreal businesses earlier today announced a government injection of millions in relief funds, including some additional commercial rent help for people, for businesses in downtown Montreal. I will bring in my colleagues now. The host of Power and Politics, Vashi Kapelis, and the CBC's David Cochrane. Good to see you both. Hope you had a good weekend. As we wait for the Prime Minister here to emerge, and as I said, Vashi, not necessarily to announce anything huge today, but to sort of give us, we think, an update on where things are at.
Yeah, I think an update is specifically around uptake of various programs that the government has rolled out. And we are entering, as you could hear from opposition leaders today, sort of a period where a lot of these programs are coming to their end or close to their end, like the CERB or the wage subsidy program. But there are sort of promises from the federal government, and in some cases specific ones, others just sort of indications that those programs will continue to some degree. And so now we're starting to get a sense of in what way. And to how much will they continue, to what degree? I think all those questions are basically going to be swirling around Parliament over the next week. And so the Prime Minister is set to give a bit of an update on the update for those programs. And the programs that I would sort of zone in on right now, as of course the number one program would be the wage subsidy. That's something the federal government has explicitly said that it will extend to the end of August. It was supposed to end in June. The uptake was not great. So my understanding is as of last week, there were about 322,000 approved applications. They had anticipated 1 million applications. They had also originally anticipated the program would cost about $70 billion total. So far, they've paid out just over $9 billion. Again, that's early last week. That's when the latest information that's available. So the government had promised to not only extend the program in order to increase the uptake, but also widen the parameters for qualification. So you had to show a 30% decline in revenue year over year. Let's say that's the kind of baseline qualifier. There were some nuances to that, but that was getting hard. That was hard initially for some businesses, even harder as they start to reopen. You mentioned Newfoundland and Labrador, Saskatchewan, lots of businesses starting to reopen to varying degrees. And so the need for the program still exists, but maybe they can't show a full 30% drop. So we'll be looking to the federal government to get some answers, and the Prime Minister specifically, on how they see this program evolving. And then also on the CERB, which we know has been, had a wild uptake, more than 8 million unique applicants to that program. And the value of that program also increased. Sort of the amount of money the government had set aside to pay for it had also increased. So what does that look like as people get ready to apply for their last month of that $2,000 a month? Will it be extended? Will there be variances in how it's applied? I mean, again, that's something that Parliament is going to be discussing. And then finally, you mentioned commercial rent. Today, Quebec announced that they're going to sort of give a lot more money to it so that landlords don't have to pay as much as they were, kind of take as much of a hit as they had planned to take. So that uptake on that program is also not fantastic. As of last week, at least 16 landlords had submitted applications on behalf of 16,000 tenants, representing 60,000 employees for rent subsidies worth $65 million. I think they had anticipated it to be about triple that. So that could be a delay, and the applications are pretty cumbersome. So that could be part of it. But we're also looking for an update on that program, if the government is considering any changes on the federal level, or if they are expecting other provinces to follow suit with Quebec.
I would say, thank you for all that, Vashti. That's all great information. I would say lots of people on CERB are probably a little bit anxious to hear more about what the future holds. Because you say we're now into, if you started when it first became available, you're on your fourth month rather of that, which ends the beginning of July. So people want some clarity around, if I don't have a job to go back to, what exactly can I count on in terms of government support? David, maybe you can pick up there, because we don't have a lot of indications other than it would be some sort of EI, CERB thing, although I do believe that there's been a suggestion it could be extended even, but we don't really know more than that.
Yeah, I think there's also the issue, Rosie, of whether you can make any permanent decisions about the life of any of these programs in the absence of knowing whether or not there's going to be a second wave of this pandemic, what the severity of it might be, how this reopenings that we're seeing across the country could trigger more spread of the virus. If you look at the data from the states, which is a different experience, some of the states that have started reopening like in a big way, like Florida, California, Texas, they've got some problems. You're seeing a big surge in numbers, and the question is, do you keep pushing ahead with that, or do you go back into a lockdown, and then how do you support people if you have to retreat from these reopenings? So that creates a public policy problem that is driven entirely by a medical situation, and it goes beyond philosophy and ability to pay. But as opposed, you could stop CERB now, but you may very well need to bring it back. Or do you make it more of a regional thing? For example, if Prince Edward Island can fully reopen its local economy, exclusive of people coming in and out of the province, or if Newfoundland and Labrador can do the same thing because of their low case levels and their relative isolation and ability to control access in and out, do you make CERB more difficult? Do you make it more like an EI, more regionally based? So there's a lot of variables that go into any of these conversations. So I suspect we'll get the math update on that from the Prime Minister. This is also, Rosie, going to be his first public comments since he went to the protest on Parliament Hill on Friday and knelt in solidarity with anti-black racism protesters. And Cabinet is meeting today, which it doesn't normally do on a Monday. And I'm told that one of the big issues that they're talking about at the Cabinet table today is policing, it is racism, and what next steps would be and what concrete actions the federal government can take. This is an issue that's really exploded in the United States, but obviously Canada is not immune from it, and certainly doesn't have completely clean hands when it comes to dealing with these issues. So there's something governments at every level of the country are dealing with, and the federal cabinet will be dealing with particularly today.
And we know that the Prime Minister did discuss it with the RCMP Commissioner on Friday, but we didn't really get an update on how that conversation went, so perhaps he'll have more to say about that too. Thank you both. I'll be back to you momentarily, but want to turn our attention to one of the provinces that has done very well in containing the virus and is now actually entering the third phase of its COVID-19 reopening plan, and that is Saskatchewan. Among other things, that means that salons, spas, and some other services can now open their doors. Jess Taytu is the owner of Just For You Day Spas in Saskatoon, and she's resuming some services today. Good to see you, Jess.
Thanks for having me.
Well, so I'm in Ontario and very jealous of this reopening stage in Saskatchewan because we are obviously nowhere near that. But tell me how you have prepared your businesses for this. I'm sure you've anxiously been awaiting it, but how have you gotten ready for it?
So we opened for massage therapy reservations back May 19th. So we've had a little bit of time of trial and error to see what works, what doesn't work, what we needed to do. Obviously, aesthetic services are a little bit more personal. We're right in their space. We're definitely having closer contact. So that means, of course, more sanitation, more policies put in place. So we've been working really hard. We've been following the Saskatchewan Health Authority's guidelines. There isn't really, unfortunately, an outline for aesthetics specifically. There is from massage therapy departments, from their insurance providers. However, aesthetics just doesn't have that. So we've really kind of been on our own to figure out, what level we want to go to, how thorough we want to be. And so we've kind of taken the angle that the safer, the better. Obviously, I don't want to be responsible for anybody getting sick or any sort of, pandemic growing in our community. So
tell me what that looks like then. What has changed practically inside your salons? What kinds of things have you had to buy or adjust?
Everything has changed. It is basically, I've been saying it's like starting a business all over again. I've had to relearn everything. Every policy, every protocol had to be rewritten. That means extensive PPE. So we have our team shows up in the morning in their clothes that they've wearing from home. They change. They have PPE changing stations where they change into their PPE. That means a uniform, a clean, sanitized apron, protection glasses, surgical mask, and nitrile or hybrid gloves, depending on the service. And then between every single client, there's an additional time added onto each service. Then they will have to change all of their PPE again. So it's just like coming into a whole new protocol for every single service that we do. And we've had to cut back on some services that weren't specifically safe, or there was things in that service that couldn't be done safely. So we've, cut those as well.
It sounds to me like a huge expense as a business owner. I mean, I guess you don't have a choice, but it sounds like a huge expense.
It is. It's incredible the difference that it's our bottom line is significantly different now. And not only is our expense for this PPE and sanitation products significantly higher, but we're not allowed to do as many services, or we can't, I should say. It's not possible because of the distancing guidelines and having clients farther apart from each other, and times that customers are entering the building had to change. So overall, our expenses are higher and our income is lower.
Did you ever have a moment where you thought to yourself, maybe this just isn't worth it?
No, I don't think so. I mean, at the beginning when we first, were closing down, I honestly believed it was going to be a couple of weeks. I mean, very naive, obviously, at that point. There was a lot of tears, but, I kind of went into survival and fight mode to protect my businesses and my 150 staff across the province. And we worked really hard while we were closed to kind of get creative and continue sales. And we did lots of promotions and things to make sure we had a bit of a cushion when we did reopen. And then, of course, we didn't just come into it blindly. We've been working around the clock to make sure that we were prepared so that we could continue. And I think because the business was strong going into this pandemic, I think we'll come out of it quite strong as well.
So what are you expecting for today? My sister's in Manitoba and she's already had her nails done, and so I'm very jealous of it all. But what are you expecting in terms of people showing up? Because I guess they have to decide what they're willing to manage in terms of risk too.
I really did think that maybe the lines would be a little slower once they got reopened, but we opened our booking lines about a week ago for reservations starting today, and we were booked solid very, very quickly. We've been very open and upfront about our sanitation policies, about all of the extra things that we've been doing to go above and beyond to make sure and ensure the safety. The Saskatchewan Health Authority has been checking in, which is really great for our industry to hold us business owners accountable and make sure that everything is continued to be done safely. And I'm really just ecstatic that our clients and our customers are being so supportive and are excited to get back in.
Good. Well, I wish you lots of luck. Thank you for telling us about how you've adapted. Lots of people obviously looking forward to the same thing happening in their province. Thank you, Jess Tetu. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
That's Jess Tetu. We spoke to her in Saskatoon as we await the Prime Minister here, going to come out of his home and give us a bit of an update on the situation, his government's response to COVID-19. I'll bring back my colleagues, Vashi and David. It's so interesting to talk to people in other parts of the country because, of course, Ontario really far behind in terms of reopening at this stage. We're still in phase 1, although the Premier expected to talk about what phase 2 would look like, although we understand not to give a date on when phase 2 is. And there's been some pressure on Premier Ford as of late to talk more about the regional reopenings, because the situation, really about 3/4 of the COVID-19 cases are in and around Toronto in the GTA. And it's sort of, at some point, lots of people are asking, does it make sense to have the same measures in place across the province if it's not the same situation across the province, Vashi? So it'll be interesting to see how they manage that later this afternoon when they update people.
Yeah, and that conversation has really started in earnest last week, and it's interesting that you bring it up, because what I found from talking to a number of mayors is it really does depend on where you live, but even some who are seeing more positive results, for example, and by positive I mean the virus is a lot more dormant there than it is in the GTA, for example, are not 100% sold on regional opening, and I think it's a regional approach rather to reopening, and I think it speaks to the intricacies of doing that. And you can just imagine, for example, in Kingston, where things are going really well, there must be a huge amount of anxiety around, let's get things going, right? Why are our restaurants closed when we have barely any cases and everyone's recovered, versus in Peel or in Mississauga, where the mayors are already, have been saying for weeks, whoa, we're already going too fast. What happens if someone wants to go for dinner and drive 2 hours into Kingston? There's some anxiety there around how are you going to manage things? You can't, how do you navigate borders within a province? It's a really, really difficult question to answer. answer. And I think it gives us a little bit of a window into why it is taking so long to answer that question. I mean, the Premier at first said he was totally against it in Ontario. Then he said, I'm open to it, nothing's off the table. But there really hasn't been much movement since then. And I do think it speaks to how complicated that might be. But at the same time, it's a hard reality to ignore, right? If you are living in one of those areas that is not hit that bad right now, your businesses are suffering, your economy is suffering because you can't reopen because of something that's happening in a very different place in the province. And so it's going to be, I'm interested to see what they say from the province today about what this phase 2 will look like, if it does include any kind of regional approach, how they might tackle that. But I think it gives us, the fact that they don't have a date attached to it gives us an idea of, again, still how far things are behind here versus other places in the country.
I mean, we're still limited to groups of 5, just so people know. We haven't, nothing's increased. You're just seeing the same 5 people all the time. And there are other provinces, David, where they have managed to do this. Alberta opened up, basically the whole province except for Calgary, and now Calgary has moved into a different phase as well. So it's not like it can't be done, these regional reopenings, although certainly there are complications to it.
It can be done if you have a handle on testing and on tracing. And Ontario has had some challenges in that particular area, and I think there is probably a reflexive instinct to go a little bit slower than faster, because a reopening that happens too fast leads to a reclosure that happens too abruptly. And this is the challenge that we're going to face in this patchwork approach to this, this quilt-like approach to this, where we talk about the Prime Minister, we see him every single day, but it's really the premiers who are driving this, who are driving the national response in terms of what closes, what reopens, what the restrictions are, and the federal government trying to help coordinate a way that there can be a consistent level of safety with an inconsistent approach to reopening. And I don't mean inconsistent in a negative way, it's just an uneven approach, because it's all different depending on where you are. And I know in places where the case loads are low, there's a frustration that it is going too slow. But as we saw in New Brunswick with that doctor who came back and didn't self-isolate properly and wasn't quite clear on where he had been, all it takes is one slip up for potentially hundreds of people to be exposed. And when you get into the larger population centers like here in central Canada, it becomes a tricky thing. So we're entering a very difficult phase, I think, for a lot of the political leaders, because the economic pain is more and more pronounced with each month and starts to pile up, and that creates a pressure and an agitation for people who are very concerned about their financial and business losses. The weather is good in most parts of the country now. People want to get outside. Kids are going crazy and want to get out and see their friends, but the virus doesn't care about any of this. And that becomes the other side of the conversation and the other side of what you have to weigh. And you just look at just how significant that chore and that task is, Rosie. The Prime Minister put $14 billion on the table last Thursday in the phone call with the premiers, and the universal reaction is almost that is nowhere close to being enough. So this is a massive financial undertaking to make sure it's done properly as well, and to make sure that local services can meet the extra strain and the extra need, and it's just not something that can be done quickly at all.
Yeah, and that $14 billion, it was very clear that was the beginning of a negotiation in terms of how that money would be used, what kind of strings would be attached, although provinces never like to hear that. So we are waiting to hear more, perhaps this week, about where they're at with those talks, as the Prime Minister has been having these weekly calls with premiers, and certainly the Deputy Prime Minister is on every premier's speed dial, from what I understand. So there are lots of talks going on behind the scenes. As we wait for the Prime Minister, who might emerge at any moment, though we haven't been given our 2-minute warning, I'll just dip quickly to David's home province in Newfoundland and Labrador, because that is another province moving into the next phase of its reopening. Groups of up to 20 people now permitted in Newfoundland. Chris O'Neill-Yates is in St. John's to give us a picture of how the reopening is going there. Chris.
Well, hi, Rosie. I've walked down and been on this street many times in the last 3 months, and this is the first sign of activity. It's Water Street, our main street here, and restaurants here will be allowed to open today with the usual provisos of social distancing. There won't be any buffets. Your tofu Chinese buffet will not be open today here on Water Street, nor will any of them. As well, people today can go out and get a haircut, which a lot of people like me were really happy about. Get your nails done, get a tattoo, but also things like funerals and weddings, things that people have been putting off. Those things can happen, as you said, with a limit of 20 people. Some recreational facilities, such as pools, some sports, will be allowed. For the tourism industry here, this is, welcome news. Even though tourists are not allowed in, there's a big encouragement on the part of tourist operators and the government, though, to encourage people to travel at home. But all this is being done with a real note of caution. This province has taken a very conservative approach, to opening things up again to some semblance of normality, because we saw a while ago, you were talking about what one case can do. We had one case at a funeral home some time ago, and it led to over 100 people coming down with COVID-19, or catching the virus, testing positive for it. So it's being done really cautiously, but people here are ready for it. It's been 3 months.
It has been. Chris O'Neill Yates, good to see you, and good to see Water Street reopening. If anyone's ever been there, quiet Water Street is not a normal thing, so it's nice to see some opening signs behind you there. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, Rosie.
Okay, we are waiting for the Prime Minister to come out today. I was just wondering who would rush out to get a COVID-19 tattoo in Newfoundland and Labrador. Maybe some people want to mark the occasion, but this is, of course, a part of a larger picture of provinces starting to reopen across Canada to varying degrees. Here's the Prime Minister on this Monday morning now to give us an update on his government's approach to all of this. Let's listen in live.
Good morning, everyone.
I want to begin this morning by reflecting on the reports and videos that have continued to surface in the last few days of violence against Black Canadians and Indigenous people. And I want to talk about what this means for our path forward as a country. On Friday, I went to a rally on Parliament Hill to show my support and listen to what community leaders and Black Canadians are calling for. I hear you and I see you. As you call out systemic discrimination, racism, and unconscious bias, as you call for action, and as you call for it now.
Our communities are suffering from inequality and racism at this time, including during this pandemic. All you have to do is look at a map of the cases of COVID-19 in Toronto and Montreal to see that Black Canadians are harder hit by COVID-19. I am here and I am listening to the demands of Black Canadians. I hear you denounce systemic discrimination, racism, unconscious bias, things that persist in our society. And I'm ready to take action.
Many people in this country simply do not feel protected by the police. In fact, they're afraid of them. That alone would be bad enough. But systemic discrimination and racism in Canada goes much further than just policing. It's about poverty and mental health. It's about the fact that people are all too often treated like criminals instead of receiving the support that they need. We, as governments, need to work together. We, as leaders, need to recognize that these problems are tied to economic inequality and the racialization of poverty. And we need bold measures to address this. Our government promised to address systemic racism and injustice. We knew that this work had to be informed by the lived experiences of racialized communities and Indigenous peoples. So we listened, and we worked together to change things. We invested in mental health resources and youth programs for Black Canadians. We worked to close the gaps in services for Indigenous communities. We funded Statistics Canada so they could create a gender, diversity, and inclusion statistic hub. And this work culminated in the release of Canada's anti-racism strategy for 2019-2022 and the creation of an anti-racism secretariat. Just last fall, we appointed a minister to focus specifically on diversity and inclusion. Together, we have made progress. Progress that has meant support for groups like the Black Health Alliance and new schools for Indigenous kids. But I hear you when you say that it isn't enough. I hear you when you say that it doesn't solve systemic racism. And I agree. With the many disturbing reports of violence against Black Canadians and Indigenous people, we know that we need to do much more, and we need to do it now. I had a discussion with Cabinet on Friday that will continue later today. I also spoke with Commissioner Lucky of the RCMP this morning. The Commissioner assured me that she will use all available tools to take quick, solid action. On our call, one of the things we discussed was the adoption of body cameras. I'm committing to raising this with the provinces this week so we can move forward as quickly as possible. Minister Blair has also reaffirmed to me his commitment to improving Indigenous policing. And later today, I have a stock take on reconciliation to discuss our work with Indigenous communities. I am committing to you that this work will continue to accelerate the pace of change, because you deserve real commitments as quickly as possible that addresses the root causes of these problems. Les choses doivent changer.
Things must change, but fixing centuries of injustice, exclusion, and violence are not things that can happen overnight. We have to work together, and we have to work hard. Today, I am pledging to continue to lead the charge, and our government will be working as well and as quickly as possible to build a country that is more just and better with you.
There's no doubt that the last few months have been harder than anyone could have expected. This pandemic has meant different challenges for everyone. But no matter who you are and no matter what you're dealing with, a little bit of help can make all the difference. Maybe your employer has been able to keep you on the payroll because of the wage subsidy, a program that's supporting 2.5 million jobs. Perhaps you got some extra help through the Canada Child Benefit, or you'll receive more money with the top-up to your old age security. Or you might even be one of the 500,000 young people who has accessed the student benefit, helping you pay for next year's tuition. Au cours des derniers mois,
in recent months, we've been working hard to help people get through this crisis. And the programs that we introduced and the investments we've been making are making a real difference. I'm thinking, for example, of a story that Anthony Housefather told me about a Montreal firm called Franklin Empire in his riding that manufactures electrical goods. That family business has been around for 4 generations and employs more than 500 people in Quebec and Ontario. The business was doing fine, but when the pandemic hit, they had to shut down their production line. They wanted to keep their employees, but they couldn't do that on their own. And that's where the emergency wage subsidy comes into play. They were able to rehire all their employees, and with our help, provide them with a full salary. We're talking about 500 persons and their families now receiving their paycheck as usual in spite of the pandemic. And this is only one example, but it does show why programs like the emergency wage subsidy are so important. But we know that there's still a lot of work to be done.
On Friday, I announced that the federal government would contribute $14 billion towards a safe restart agreement with the provinces and territories for the things that all Canadians need as we get our country back up and running. Right now, we're working with the premiers on what this restart could look like in the coming months. And as we do that, we're staying focused on people's new realities. If you work in a hospital or in a business that's reopening, you'll need PPE to stay safe. If you're back on the job, you might need transit, childcare, or the option to take time off if you're ill. If you're a senior or at higher risk from COVID-19, you may need some extra support. These are the things that Canadians are thinking about, so it's what we're thinking about too.
The provinces and territories are all facing different realities right now, and we have to consider that as we look to the next steps. But wherever you live, we are working with your premier to reach a restart agreement that will allow us to protect your health and safety together. In addition to cooperating on that agreement, the premiers and myself have also discussed about Canadians who are separated from their family members because of the border closure. Obviously, we want families to be together, but our priority remains the safety of all Canadians. So we will be introducing a limited exemption that will allow members of the immediate family of citizens or permanent residents to enter Canada, mainly spouses, children, and the parents of minor children. But I want to be absolutely clear. Any person entering Canada will have to self-isolate for 14 days. I know that Minister Mendicino will have more to say about this later today.
This is an incredibly difficult time to be apart from a spouse, a child, or mom and dad. We hear that. That's why we're bringing in a limited exemption to allow immediate family members of citizens or permanent residents to come to Canada. I want to be clear, though. Anyone entering the country will be required to quarantine for 14 days. And if you don't follow these rules, you could face serious penalties. I know that Minister Mendicino will have more to say about all of this later today.
I know that after this difficult spring, a lot of people are hoping that the summer will be easier to deal with. Things are starting to improve for many people, but we know there is still a lot of work to be done, and Canadians can count on our support in the months and weeks to come. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va commencer la période de questions par le téléphone aujourd'hui. Opérateur, c'est à vous.
Thank you. Merci. First question, Brian Lilly, Toronto Sun. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. You've spoken often about the need for the provinces to be cautious in reopening. Last week, you specifically said that you want to be clear we're not out of the woods. The pandemic is still threatening the health and safety of Canadians. So I want to ask you about the fact that so many Canadians did participate in protests over the weekend. Some were wearing masks, some were not. Some were social distancing, and others were not. But a lot of Canadians are looking and saying, I've lost my job because I followed the rules. I couldn't go to a family member's funeral because I followed the rules. What do you say to Canadians who are sitting and saying, I understand the issues of racism, I understand the issues the protesters were raising, but I've lost out on nearly 3 months of my life due to this. Can you continue to support the lockdown measures that have been in place?
We've seen thousands of Canadians come out this weekend and over the past days to highlight their deep concerns and stand in solidarity with racialized Canadians and Indigenous Canadians. Again, as you pointed out, we saw many efforts made to wear masks, to continue social distancing. It is important that we follow public health advice throughout, even as we protest and demonstrate in order to create a better world. We have to get that balance right, and I continue to exhort Canadians to do just that. Okay. Je pense qu'au cours des derniers jours, on a vu des milliers de Canadiens
thousands and thousands of Canadians go down into the street to demonstrate, to talk about inequality and systemic discrimination that exists in Canada, particularly for racialized Canadians and Indigenous Canadians. We also saw that many people have made an effort by wearing a mask and keeping the proper distance from others, and they've been following public health advice. And we need people to continue to follow that public health advice, even when they are demonstrating. It's important that we be careful and that we continue to get through this crisis.
Steps from where you took a knee, though, Prime Minister, there was an Ottawa restaurant allowing customers to eat their pizza socially distanced on a patio. They're facing an $880 fine for violating the same emergency orders that you violated, that many of the people at the protest violated. So can you continue to say that we've got to have these lockdown measures in place when there is obviously a difference of how they are applied between people meeting on their driveways, people eating pizza, and people protesting?
Thank you for your question, Brian. I mean, there's a lot of people wondering about what exactly is the right thing to do, what the coming weeks and months will hold for us. One of the things that we've seen very clearly from other jurisdictions, including places like South Korea and others, where a strong handling of the crisis at the beginning has given way to some resurgences here and there, is that as we loosen some of the population control measures, as people are returning to work in some ways, seeing businesses reopen, we need to step up in other ways. We need to continue socially distancing. We need to wear masks where appropriate. But we also need to make sure that we are stepping up on things like contact tracing and exposure notification and massive testing. There are many more things we need to do. Even as we restart the economy, we need to bring in other measures as well to ensure that we can handle any resurgence. All this is difficult and frustrating and longer than we'd hoped it would be in many ways. But at the same time, we know that the cost of having to return into social isolation, return into lockdown because of a massive resurgent is not one that anyone wants to bear, which is why we are being very cautious going forward, and we continue to encourage people to follow all public health advice and guidance.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question. Raymond Fillon, TVA. À vous.
Good morning, Prime Minister. Are you concerned that these demonstrations that we've seen and continue to see will boost the number of cases? And will you be tested now since you were in the middle of a crowd on Friday? Well, Ray, as you all saw, I took the necessary steps as much as possible. I wore a mask. I kept a proper distance to the best of my ability. And of course, this is a very delicate balance, and people will have to be cautious. If you cannot follow the distancing measures, you must wear a mask, wash your hands regularly, and use disinfectant. People feel a very profound need to demonstrate, to show their solidarity with racialized and Indigenous Canadians, people who face this systemic discrimination and have been enduring that right across the country. At the same time, we must keep our distance from others and do everything we can to prevent further spread of the virus.
We've seen that people feel a deep need to stand in solidarity with racialized Canadians, with Indigenous Canadians who continue to face unacceptable levels of systemic discrimination in this country. This is a time for people to make sure their voice is heard, but it's also a time in which we need to follow public health instructions as best as possible, which is why I and many others wore masks, even as we tried to keep our distances in those massive crowds. But we need to make sure we're getting that balance right of looking to build a better world, looking to ensure that real change happens now and into the coming months, while at the same time ensuring that we slow and decrease the spread of COVID-19.
En suivi, Ray?
Follow up?
Oui, on vous a vu vendredi
well, we saw you Friday kneeling on the ground. What did it mean to you? Could you explain that to us? For me, it meant showing respect for all the people demonstrating around me, and it meant saying that things are not right, that we have a system that continues to discriminate against Black Canadians, racialized Canadians, Indigenous Canadians. And we must acknowledge the fact that even though we live in an extraordinary country, maybe the best country in the world, we still have a lot of work to do to ensure that everyone in Canada feels that they live in the best country in the world. That is not the reality for everyone. And for me, kneeling was a sign of respect and solidarity with them.
Thank you. Operator, next question.
Thank you. Merci. Prochaine question, Hélène Buzetti, Le Devoir. À vous.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I'd like to come back to the $14 billion you promised to the provinces. Did you agree on how the money would be shared between the provinces? Mr. Legault was saying it should not be the traditional formula, the per capita formula, because, and in fact, it should be based on the effect of the pandemic in the province. In other words, Quebec and Ontario should receive more. What do you think of that? Well, Quebec and Ontario will be receiving more because of their population. We recognize that many jurisdictions who have not had that many cases of COVID-19 have still had to suspend certain services, and they do have additional costs to bear in order to protect against a second wave. And all of that are discussions and negotiations that are ongoing with the provinces. But the fact is that we are here to ensure that every single Canadian right across the country has access to whatever they need, whether it is personal protective equipment or child care or help for our seniors or help for our municipalities so that we can restart the economy safely. Follow up? Yes, and I'd like to come back to what you said in your speech about body cameras for police officers. What is your position on this? Should the RCMP officers wear them? And when you discussed this with the provinces, or when you did discuss it, what was their response or reaction? Were they open to the idea? Well, I did speak to the premiers of the need to take concrete action. We did not directly speak of body cameras for police, but that is certainly something that I will be raising with them in the coming days at our weekly call. So, of course, at the federal level, we have a responsibility for the RCMP, but the provinces have their own responsibility for the provincial and municipal police forces, so we will have to work together. But certainly there is no doubt that body cameras are a very important part of this. It shows transparency, and I think it would be very important for police officers to have them in this country.
On Thursday last week with the premiers, I highlighted the need for us to take concrete, direct actions to move forward on systemic discrimination in this country, on moving forward together on making real change so that more Canadians can feel safe and respected in their own country. This is a challenge that has gone on for far too long and requires concerted action across all orders of government. In regards to body cameras, it didn't come up in our conversation last Thursday. But certainly moving forward this week, it will come up. As you know, the federal government has jurisdiction over the RCMP, but there are many other provincial and municipal police forces that should be looking at greater transparency measures as well. And I will certainly be talking about with the provinces and premiers about the need to move forward on measures like body cameras.
Thank you. Operator, last question on the phone. Dernière question téléphone.
Yes, thank you. Merci. Last question, Christy Kirkup, The Globe and Mail. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. In recent days, Athabasca Chippewa First Nation Chief Alan Adam has alleged that he was beaten by the RCMP. He has shared pictures of his bloodied face and swollen eye. Given this incident and many others that have come to light, how can Canadians be confident that there are mechanisms in place to ensure that there is someone policing the police?
We have obviously all seen and been deeply alarmed by the pictures that Chief Adams shared. Obviously, Minister Miller has engaged with the Chief directly multiple times over the past days. We need to do more. We need to take significant measures to move forward. We brought in an RCMP management board a number of years ago when as we committed to, that is helping with civilian oversight over the RCMP, but there is more to do, and that is a conversation I had with Commissioner Lucky this morning, and I will continue working with her and with all of our partners on ensuring that we bring forward significant, concrete, and rapid measures to address these issues. Okay.
We were all disturbed by the photograph shared by the chief a few days ago. Minister Miller has been in direct communication with him, and I spoke to him this morning, and I spoke to Commissioner Lucky of the RCMP this morning. We have to work together to expedite change within the RCMP. Now, we did bring in additional measures in recent years to ensure greater accountability within the RCMP, but we know that there's a lot more to be done, and we will be working together in the coming days to bring in new measures.
Prime Minister, 5 years ago, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission highlighted systemic issues between police and Indigenous people. The National Public Inquiry that your government called on missing and murdered Indigenous women did the same. Have you given any consideration to appointing someone in your cabinet to assess allegations of systematic racism and to be tasked with taking action on it?
We have not waited for those reports to move forward. We have been taking action on these systematic challenges, whether it was bringing in new review and oversight management boards for the RCMP, whether it's moving forward on Statistics Canada, being better able to work with disaggregated data, whether it's working more directly with community organizations and giving them the funds to be able to develop programs that can help. There are many things we've done, including directly within the National Police Force in terms of bringing forward significant measures and transformations. But there is much, much more to do. We appointed a Minister of Diversity and Inclusion for the very first time last fall, and she has been tasked with looking directly at these issues, and our Minister of Public Safety has, of course, the mandate to ensure that we are fighting against systemic discrimination in everything we do.
Bonjour, M. Trudeau. Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada.
Louis Blouin, Radio-Canada. Now, you denounced a systemic racism, but for years, commissions and experts have been recommending all sorts of things, and that are still waiting for concrete results. For example, an investigative bureau that would be looking at incidents associated with police brutality against Indigenous people. Will we see an organization like that in Canada soon? Well, we will very quickly be looking at all the measures that are currently in place in terms of transparency, accountability, and so on. And we are ready to do anything necessary. We are prepared to introduce new structures or strengthen existing structures. That's exactly the kind of conversation I had with the Commissioner this morning. And those are the conversations we are also having in Cabinet. We know we have to take concrete steps, and we know we need to strengthen the current system and perhaps add things to it, and that's what we're looking at this week. 1 year ago, the investigation on missing and murdered Indigenous women recommended that civilian groups be asked to monitor the police right across the country. And I think the people are wondering what you're waiting for to do that. When will those groups be put in place? Well, the RCMP has created advisory groups in every region to work with the Indigenous people, but we know there has to be more done, and that's what we're looking at this week. We're going to have conversations about where we can go a bit further, where we have to go a lot further in order to ensure that we are taking concrete action, that we're not just talking about intentions, but that we're taking concrete action that will transform this country.
We've had many conversations over the past years about fighting against systemic discrimination, whether it has been creating better oversight of the RCMP, which we've moved forward on, whether it's the RCMP Commissioner setting up Indigenous advisory councils right across the country to better respond to what they're doing. We've done a number of things, but we know we have to do much more. And that's what we're talking about this week, looking at concrete measures where we can strengthen certain existing bodies, where we might need to bring in new bodies, where we can move forward on different measures. There's a range of things that obviously we need to do. The intention has been there to fight systemic discrimination in this country. We now need to do even more in terms of actions to make sure that gets done.
Hi, Prime Minister. Tom Parry, CBC. I'd like to ask you about your own decision to attend the rally on Friday. This was clearly something that was important to you, but you've been telling Canadians for weeks to avoid doing things that are important to them. So why did you decide to go against your own advice? And also, you were asked earlier whether you're going to get tested. Are you?
I will continue to follow public health protocols in terms of getting tested. I'm open to getting tested, obviously, but when I was in isolation because I was in proximity with my wife who had tested positive, it was determined at the time that I didn't need to get tested because I was isolating and I showed absolutely no symptoms. I continue, obviously, to show no symptoms. In regards to the rallies, it was important for me to attend. I think to look out the windows of my office and see thousands upon thousands of young people, of Canadians of all ages, stand in solidarity to wanting to see change happen, I felt it was important for me to be part of that, to be able to listen, to be able to hear people, and to be able to understand and to share with people how important it was to act on it. I, as best I could, followed social distancing measures, wearing a mask, keeping distance where possible. But I recognize that it is a difficult situation where we are trying to balance very important competing interests. But for me, it was important that I be there to hear.
I think we're in a situation now where we're constantly being called upon to make difficult choices. Of course, we must try to follow public health recommendations. That's what I tried to do. But I also felt it was very important that the Prime Minister be there to listen and hear the voices of thousands of Canadians who want us to act quickly to counter systemic discrimination that exists in this country. That is the choice that I made, and I believe it was the right choice. Well, several months ago, I self-isolated when Sophie tested positive for COVID-19. And I am being told that since I had no symptoms, I had no need to be tested, but I'm always open to be tested again.
RCMP body cameras, I just want to be clear, this is something that you think should happen then? You think that the RCMP officers should be wearing these cameras? And also in your conversations with the Commissioner, is she saying that, does she think that her officers would be willing to wear these cameras?
I think these are discussions we need to go forward on the logistics, on the cost, on the cost to provinces where there is contract policing in place. But the challenges that I've heard are more logistical and economic concerns about remote areas and the way those cameras would work. But yes, it is something that is, in my opinion, what we need to move forward with. Okay.
In my discussions with the Commissioner this morning, we talked about body cameras. The challenges associated with those cameras are have to do with logistics and economics. They're not as substantive. There are also some technical challenges. So I think we agree that we have to move forward with body cameras for RCMP officers.
Hello, Prime Minister. It's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. You took a knee at Friday's rally, showing your support for the Black Lives Matter movement. Many of the protesters we spoke with said that they appreciate the symbolism, but they want concrete actions to show that that was not just a photo op. You mentioned body cameras in your speech, but many advocates say that's simply a Band-Aid solution. So I'm wondering, what firm steps will you take immediately to begin addressing systemic racism in Canada?
Well, I think, first of all, body cameras is a significant step towards transparency, and we're, as I've said, going to work on that this week. We're also going to move forward on looking at various review structures and oversight commissions at the policing level to make sure that they have the powers and the abilities to do what needs to be done. But when we talk about systemic racism, it's easy and important to look at policing in this country as being a key challenge. But the drivers of systemic racism are far greater than just policing. They're socioeconomic factors, they're inequalities, long-standing inequalities, the racialization of poverty is a reality in this country. And we need to make sure that we are addressing all of those at the same time. That is why, as a cabinet, as a government, as a country, we will have many important conversations, but I hear very clearly that as much as we have made strong efforts over the past years on stepping forward in the right way, it hasn't been enough. We have to do much more, and we will.
You've also said that the protests are calling for action now, and one of the clear calls that we're hearing is to reduce police budgets and to redirect money to better support Black communities. Minneapolis announced that it will do just that, and I'm wondering whether you will review the RCMP budget.
Well, I think there's always a need to review every dollar, every public dollar spent to ensure that we're getting the best results out of it, that what we're doing is the best thing to keep Canadians safe. That's something that Canadians expect of their governments, and we will continue to do that to ensure that budgets are spent appropriately, the budgets themselves are appropriate, and make sure that we're also investing in all the things that need to be invested in to ensure truly safer communities. Okay.
I think people expect us to be constantly reviewing budgets and expenditures to be sure that we are investing money in the right things and that we're developing the right programs and tools to keep all Canadians safe. And that's something we will continue to do.
Global News. Prime Minister, the Migrant Workers Alliance for Change says more than 1,000 complaints on behalf of migrant farm workers went unheeded by federal and provincial authorities ahead of these recent COVID-19 outbreaks. Why didn't your government do more to ensure these essential workers were safe?
No one in Canada should be at greater risk of COVID-19, and we know we need to do better by migrant workers. Temporary foreign workers in Canada have an extremely important role to play in our agricultural systems. We've had many discussions with the agricultural industry and with migrant worker organizations to ensure that we were putting measures in place that would allow both isolation and the important work in assuring Canada's food supply continues. Of course, we will be continuing to listening to them and looking how we can make things better going forward.
Cramped living conditions, working long hours, and close proximity. Advocates have been complaining about these issues for decades. Will your government consider giving migrant workers permanent resident status so they can assert their right to a safe workplace?
We need, whether they're permanent residents or whether they're simply temporary foreign workers, we need to do a better job of protecting temporary agricultural workers in this country, temporary foreign workers in this country. We have taken a number of steps, but there's more to do, and we will do it.
Merci beaucoup. C'est ce qui m'a fait la conférence de presse aujourd'hui.
Merci tout le monde.
That is the Prime Minister of Canada on this Monday, giving his daily briefing, which is usually about COVID-19, although today primarily the discussion around anti-Black racism protests and policing, although a little bit of news there on exemptions for people looking to reunite their families if they got sort of separated between Canada and the United States over the course of the past few months. I'll bring in Vashi Kapelis and David Cochrane to walk us through there what we heard. So it is interesting how events sometimes overtake these press conferences and it no longer becomes solely focused on the pandemic, but in this case, very much in response to what we have seen from politicians and people on the street about what the past couple of days anti-Black protests, Vashi.
Yeah, and lots of interesting comments there to dissect. I think none more significant than the Prime Minister near the end there, initially talking about his discussion with RCMP Commissioner Brenda Lucki this morning and broaching the subject of body cameras for RCMP officers. But then when pressed by various reporters, including our colleague Tom, he basically endorsed the use of or moving forward. He said, moving forward, we agree we have to move forward with body cameras. That was his exact wording for RCMP officers. That is significant. He mentioned that he would be talking to premiers, for example, about policing in general and body cameras for policing in general, because, of course, jurisdiction is very different when it comes to various police forces and even in some cases the RCMP in various provinces. But where the federal government does have jurisdiction is over certain RCMP members in certain RCMP members rather, in certain areas of the country. And I'm thinking specifically following the events of last week in Nunavut, where a number of investigations have been launched, 6 actually since January, into the conduct of RCMP officers there. I spoke with the mayor and deputy mayor of Iqaluit, who, for example, have taken it upon themselves at the municipal level to introduce various motions and statements in support of making those body cameras mandatory for RCMP officers. So for the Prime Minister to come out and say that is something he endorses, I think is significant. Whether it affects the policy direction of the RCMP going forward is a different subject, I think, or not different subject, but it's certainly a different question. I have not heard Commissioner Luckey recently talk about it. He mentioned that in their discussion, she brought up some of the challenges, be it economical, be it technical. There have been 2, I think, distinct studies that have been done, or trials, I should say, on the use of body cameras. It would be interesting to find out from the RCMP exactly the reasons that they've held back on moving forward. But if it is economic, let's say, if it is technical, now that the Prime Minister has pronounced his support for that, what exactly is the federal government prepared to do to make sure that the RCMP can move forward and address those challenges, and how quickly could that happen? And then where does the conversation go with the various provinces who, again, as I mentioned, do have jurisdiction over various policing forces, and even at the municipal level, rather, to a certain degree, depending on the city that you're in. I think this is a definite shift in that conversation. I mean, the fact that it's been studied for a number of years but not really uniformly acted upon tells you that there was this discussion to be had. I think that given the number of questions the Prime Minister got about sort of the symbolism associated with a lot of what he said and done in the last week in support of those protesters, the question has often been to him, well, what are you going to do about it? And he acknowledged in his speech today that there is more to do. Could this be, an actual tangible action taken in light of everything that's gone on over the last 2 weeks? It sounds like he's in support of doing it. I think there's, questions remain about how exactly that happens.
Yeah, it was interesting that he spoke to Commissioner Luckey on Friday, and it sounds like he spoke to her again this morning in light of some of the things that we saw over the weekend, namely the allegations from Chief Adam that he was physically assaulted by RCMP, and those pictures that we've seen everywhere of the nature of what the assault was, which seemed very severe. Obviously, there are conversations happening and spurred on by events in this country very much, David. And I wonder, too, about body cameras for the RCMP. The RCMP are often in remote areas of the country, sometimes on their own in patrol cars, and whether having body cameras would be of help in policing and in sort of the oversight of police, as there are policing forces in this country that have moved in this direction as well. Calgary is the biggest city where all the officers now have body cams.
Yeah, the RCMP is in Northern Canada, remote Canada, rural Canada, and provides some municipal policing as well. But something the Prime Minister said very early in his remarks, where he said the reality is that many people in this country simply do not feel protected by the police. In fact, they're afraid of them. And Vashi outlined some of the incidents of the past week. We had that 22-year-old man in Nunavut, an Indigenous man, knocked to the ground by the door of a pickup truck. That was captured on camera. But we also have the 26-year-old Chantel Moore shooting death in New Brunswick, killed during a wellness check by a police officer, and of course the Alan Adam altercation with the RCMP, which the police do not deny happened. They just say that it was justified. One of those was caught on film, 2 of those were not. And the reality is in this day and age, with the issue of police use of force so front and center, you simply can't rely on citizens with cell phones to capture all of these moments. And it happened in Nunavut. And look at the situation in Buffalo, for example. I know it's another country and another police force, but by now a lot of people would have seen the image of the man being shoved to the ground by a police officer, his head hitting the concrete and blood going everywhere. The official police report of that incident was that he slipped and fell, when the video shows that he was clearly shoved. So it's an issue where the Prime Minister has acknowledged that people in the country do not feel safe. They feel threatened by police. They're afraid of police. When this technology does exist, let's face it, money is no object right now in terms of dealing with issues. There's billions of dollars being spent every week. This seems like something he's put serious momentum behind, and if the National Police Force suddenly gets kitted out with body cameras, the way they all get pepper spray, baton, a gun, and a car, it's going to be very difficult for municipal and provincial police forces to, I think, ignore that, because you will have a national standard that will be applied by the RCMP that will create significant political pressure downward for other police forces to get in line. So I think that was a couple of interesting things for the Prime Minister there, to acknowledge up front that the severity of the problem, acknowledge that the federal government, including his, have simply not done enough, and then promise change. And right off the bat, one immediate thing would be the idea of moving ahead with body cameras for the National Police Force.
Yeah, just to give another recent example would be the death of Regis Kraczynski-Paquette, who fell to her death after police responded to essentially it was a mental health call. And Chief Saunders in Toronto has said that he also is open to body cameras, even suggested maybe he could get them in place by September. But that too, another place where certainly her family feels like body cameras and more evidence of what happened would be helpful in understanding how a woman was called for help and ended up dead when police went into the apartment. So lots of things there, obviously, to take in. Let's just quickly go into the exemption part, because there are lots of people that have tweeted. We've seen stories about families separated between Canada and the United States, and now the government allowing an exemption for a very particular set of people who have been separated from their family. Vashi.
Yeah, and this is something that the Prime Minister hinted, I think it was a few weeks ago, that they were considering. I'll read the exact wording. A limited exemption at the border, he says, we will introduce to allow immediate family members of citizens or permanent residents to come to Canada. The Prime Minister also added the caveat that they will, like everyone else who crosses the border, have to self-isolate, have to quarantine for 14 days following when that happens. I don't know the details on exactly when they're going to introduce it, or if they have to do anything other than just decide that that's going to be the case. But you're right that there have been a lot of anecdotal stories of people who are separated, right, from especially their immediate family. So think kids, parents, that kind of thing, and separated at the border and unable to reunite with them. And so this looks like it will provide the ability to do so. I'm curious to find out if it will be reciprocated on the other side of the border, or how that exactly is going to be coordinated or looked at, and the timeline for that. So as soon as I do get those details, I'll make sure, or maybe there might be a press release already out that I haven't been able to see, but we'll make sure and share those as soon as we can.
Yeah,
okay, I don't think the press release says the time. Yeah, go ahead. Maybe
it comes into effect. The CBSA is announcing as of basically midnight tonight, June 8th, 23:59, for nationals who are immediate family members of Canadian citizens and permanent residents who do not have COVID-19 or exhibit any signs or symptoms of COVID-19 and who do not have reason to believe they have COVID-19 will be exempt from the prohibition on entry to Canada if entering to be with immediate family members for a period of at least 15 days. So you have to do the 14-day quarantine. You can't border hop, come in and out, and then that's followed by a very specific list of spouse or common law partner, a dependent child, parent or step-parent, of who exactly qualifies. But essentially the ban on that, on the family unification thing, if you're coming here for a serious chunk of time, that kicks in essentially at midnight tonight.
Okay, thank you both. I'll come back to you both if you don't mind. As we await the press conference with cabinet ministers and public health officials, the immigration minister, Marco Mendicino, will be there to go through some of those details we just heard there from Vashi and David. Obviously, though, the news from the Prime Minister's briefing today really very much in response to those anti-Black racism protests that we've seen in the United States and now in this country, and the Prime Minister's admission that this government has done things, needs to do more. We'll continue a conversation with cabinet this afternoon in order to do so, and his essentially his endorsement that body cameras for the RCMP is something that we need to move in the direction of, and we know he's been speaking to the commissioner, so we'll see where that conversation goes later today. We have heard, though, over the past number of weeks, of course, that we are an awfully long way away from getting back to normal. There is a hunt going on, obviously, for the COVID-19 vaccine. Big challenges with patient testing, tracking, treatment. My next guest is part of a Vancouver team co-developing a potential antibody treatment, and the first human trial for that right now has already begun. Joining me from Vancouver is Carl Hansen. He's CEO of Abcelera. Nice to see you.
Great to see you, Rosemary.
I know the government has supported Abcelera in this bid, so give us a sense of what you're doing and how it might help the rest of us.
Well, Abcelera is a biotech company in Vancouver that has developed a technology that lets us scan, decode, and analyze natural immune systems. Earlier in March, we applied that technology to look through the natural immune response of a COVID-19 survivor to isolate an antibody that can potently block the virus. And recently, we have partnered with Eli Lilly, a global pharma in the US, and together we have taken this into a phase 1 clinical trial to test for safety. The next steps from which would be to test, can this antibody help patients to get better faster, and ultimately, can it prevent patients from being infected?
So do we know at this stage whether once you've had COVID-19, you are then immune from it, or are we still not sure of that?
There's good evidence that most patients mount a robust immune response against COVID-19. There are some reports of patients that have been infected twice, but those reports are quite rare, and I think that the data is not yet conclusive on that. So the preponderance of evidence would suggest that once you've been infected or you mount a good immune response, that you are protected from the virus.
So once you are done this phase here of the trial using humans, what are you hoping will be the outcome? What is on the other side of that for the rest of us?
Great question. So maybe the first thing I would highlight is the speed at which this is going. So typically, once an antibody goes into the clinic, it would take anywhere from 2.5 years to 5 years to get an approval. Obviously, no one has the time to wait for that right now, and so we're working closely with regulatory agencies to expedite this process. The first trial, which is the phase 1 that started and was announced last week, is intended to test the safety of the antibody in patients that are already infected. The next trials will be in patients that are earlier on in the infection, and we expect that there'll be a series of additional trials designed to test use cases for this antibody, either on patients that are very sick to help them get better, or even on patients that have not yet been exposed to protect them from infection in the meantime while we're developing a vaccine.
You talked about the speed of this. I've talked to many scientists working from different places in the country on a vaccine or antibody tests. Have you ever seen in your life anything like this in terms of the sharing of information and the cooperation between scientists?
Absolutely not. So the speed is unprecedented. I think it speaks to the level of cooperation. I was talking to the company recently and made the analogy, it's like running a marathon in an hour. So this is not just fast, this is completely unprecedented. And it's been made possible because companies and governments, regulatory agencies, and the private sector have come together in a way that is truly unprecedented to bring the best technologies forward. And that is really being driven by an urgent need and a desire by the biotech industry to do something about it.
So where would you say we are in terms of the timeline? I think the last time we asked the Prime Minister about this, he was still saying maybe next year, maybe beyond. Certainly that's what Dr. Theresa Tam is saying as well. Are we or have we shrunk the timeline because of the way you're all cooperating and working together? Would you say that we are getting close to some sort of solution here?
Well, 5 months ago, if you had suggested that someone could go from initiating a program, which we did in March, to a phase 1 clinical trial, I think you would rightly have thought that's science fiction. So we had gone into this projecting that we were ambitiously looking to start a clinical trial in July. Since then, we managed to beat that deadline. On the clinical trial development, it's difficult to speculate exactly when the trials would be approved because it depends on the outcome. It depends on the patients that we're looking to treat. But there's good hope, and I think probably reason to suspect that this could be in place by the end of the year. And various companies have already moved to large-scale manufacturing at risk so that they'll be able to provide the large number of doses that will be needed to meet the patient need.
Well, amazing. I know I did hear the government last week saying that they had procured, or they were procuring 37 million syringes in order to deal with this thing if we get closer than we think. I'll end on this maybe, and it's something, again, that the government has talked about in cooperation with Gavi and other organizations, and that's the equity of a distribution of a vaccine. Whether the fact that Canada has invested in Epsilera, does that give Canadians an advantage to getting the vaccine? Is that something that you talk about inside the company?
It's obviously a topic inside the company, in our communities and with government. Every indication from our partners from the government is that the laser focus is on bringing something to the clinic that is safe and effective, and then doing whatever is needed, pulling out the stops to get that therapy to as many patients as are required. Those are efforts in the developed world. There's also some very strong efforts to make these medicines accessible to developing worlds. And of course, that's something that we all want to happen.
Okay, Mr. Hansen, I know you're super busy, but this is such important work. Thanks for allowing us to pick your brain and highlight it today. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Rosemary.
That's Carl Hansen. He's CEO of Epsilera. They are doing those antibody treatment tests in the clinical trials right now. So that's some sort of encouraging news that all of this is happening, and we seem to be moving in the right direction on a number of fronts in terms of getting a vaccine or some sort of treatment. Again, hearing Mr. Hansen say it could be towards the end of the year. I'm not sure I had heard that timeline before, but that's some good news for all of us. So obviously, we are waiting right now for cabinet ministers to emerge here. They're a little bit late for their briefing, and public health officials to give us the picture of what is happening in the country right now. But I'll bring back my colleagues, Vashi Kapelis and David Cochran, as we await for that. I should say I am going to speak to the Premier of the Northwest Territories shortly about how they are moving into the next phase of their reopening, but probably also a little bit around this policing issue, because of course she would be on the calls with the Prime Minister that they are having now on a weekly basis, and one of those conversations we know is around policing, and certainly the Prime Minister wants to talk more about body cameras this week. Okay, everyone has moved into their positions as I was as I was yammering on, so I will come back to you both in a little bit. Thank you very much. Here now, this is the President of the Treasury Board, Jean-Yves Duclos.
Bonjour tout le monde. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being with us again. Today we'll have the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Theresa Tam, who is Canada's Chief Public Health Officer, from Dr. New, who is Deputy Chief Public Health Officer, and from Minister Marco Mendicino, who is Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Dr. Tam.
Good afternoon, bonjour. So as of end of the day, Sunday, June the 7th, there are now 95,699 confirmed cases of COVID-19, including 7,800 deaths. 54,233, or 57%, have now recovered. Labs across Canada have tested over 1,896,000 people for COVID-19 to date, with about 5% of these testing positive overall. Over the past week, we have been testing an average of 33,000 people daily. Again, these numbers can change quickly, and they're now being updated once daily in the evenings on canada.ca/coronavirus. Across the country, the COVID-19 epidemic is continuing to slow down, with daily case counts continuing to decrease, even in Canada's most affected provinces, Ontario and Quebec. The trouble spots where COVID-19 transmission is continuing include a number of outbreaks, but more concerning still are areas with community spread of the virus. Although outbreaks are problematic, they can be easier to manage with contact tracing and targeted public health control measures, especially if tied to a single setting. Community transmission, on the other hand, can be harder to manage, depending on how widespread virus activity is. This is why some of Canada's hotspots have been a persistent challenge, contributing to fluctuations in the national growth rate. Provinces have been mobilizing more testing to trace and control any lingering chains of transmission in these most affected areas. Taken together, these trouble spots remind us we've got to continue our path down the curve with extreme care, maintaining physical distancing and hygiene practices everywhere to make sure that there are no new flare-ups. I know it's been difficult dealing with these weeks and months of uncertainty, and despite the fact that we're not there yet and that we still don't know what lies ahead, there is one thing that has become clear, is that Canadians will unite with determination to get through adversity together, and will keep on doing it to protect our families, our communities, and our society. When we began this journey, I had believed in the strength of Canadians, but what I have seen over these difficult months has been so much more than I imagined, and it's enough to give me assurance we'll get through the uncertainties ahead too. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tam. Dr. New, please.
Merci.
Thank you.
As of the end of the day, Sunday, June 7th, there are now 95,699 confirmed cases, including 7,800 deaths. 54,233, or 57%, have now recovered. Labs across Canada have tested over 1,896,000 people for COVID-19 to date, with about 5% of these testing positive overall. Over the past week, we have been testing an average of 33,000 people daily. These numbers change quickly and are now being updated once daily in the evenings on canada.ca/coronavirus. Across the country, the COVID-19 epidemic is continuing to slow down, with daily cases continuing to decrease, even in Canada's most affected provinces, Ontario and Quebec. The trouble spots where COVID-19 transmission is continuing include a number of outbreaks, but more concerning still are areas with community spread of the virus. Although outbreaks are problematic, they can be easier to manage with contact tracing and targeted public health control measures, especially if tied to a single setting. Community transmission, on the other hand, can be harder to manage, depending on how widespread virus activity is. This is why some of Canada's hotspots have been persistent, challenge contributing to fluctuations in the national growth rate. Provinces have been mobilizing more testing to trace and control any lingering chains of transmission in these most affected areas. Taken together, these trouble spots remind us that we've got to continue our path down the curve with extreme care, maintaining physical distancing and hygiene practices everywhere to make sure that there are no new flare-ups. I know it's been difficult dealing with these weeks and months of uncertainty. And despite the fact that we are not there yet, and that we still don't know what lies ahead, there's one thing that has become clear. It's that Canadians will unite with determination to get through adversity together, and will keep on doing it to protect our families, our communities, and our society. When we began this journey, I had belief in the strength of Canadians, but what I've seen over these difficult months has been so much more than I imagined, and it's enough to give me assurance that we'll get through the uncertainties ahead too. Thank you.
Merci, Dr.
Thank you, Dr. New. I'll now give the floor to Marco Mendocino, the Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship. Marco.
Thank you, Jean-Yves. Everyone. I'm pleased to be here today to make an important announcement regarding the measures we are taking to protect the health and safety of all Canadians at our borders. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, Canada entered into a reciprocal agreement with the United States banning all non-essential travel between our two countries. Similar restrictions were put into place for all other international travel. We also made sure when these special measures came into force that the flow of goods and essential services into Canada would continue unimpeded by allowing temporary workers, students, and visa holders to enter in a safe and orderly manner, all of whom are subject to the mandatory 14-day isolation period upon arrival. This approach has ensured we continue to get access to the food, fuel, and medical supplies we need without putting in jeopardy the health and safety of Canadians. While the border measures have been part of the government's overall response to COVID-19, we also recognize that they have had a significant impact on personal and discretionary travel. In some cases, and as a necessary precaution to reduce the risks associated with COVID-19, families have been separated under the terms of the non-essential travel agreement between Canada and the United States. We acknowledge that this has been difficult. Where appropriate, our officials at the border have exercised their discretion responsibly to resolve individual matters on a case-by-case basis. Over the last several weeks, we've worked hard to address the question of how best to keep families together in a compassionate way, but measured against the ongoing concerns related to the transmission of the virus. Following a review of our current policies and in consultation with our public healthcare experts, as well as the provinces and territories, we now have a path forward. Today, I'm pleased to announce an exemption under the current travel restrictions that will allow the immediate family members of Canadian citizens and permanent residents to enter into Canada. A number of important conditions must be satisfied before this exemption will apply. First, immediate family members will be defined as spouses, common law partners, dependent children and their children, parents, and legal guardians. Second, immediate family members must plan to stay in Canada for at least 15 days. And third, all other public health care protocols, including screens at the border, remain firmly in place. Here, I would make specific reference to the fact that anyone permitted entry under the immediate family exemption will still have to self-quarantine for 14 days as soon as they enter Canada. To be clear, the immediate family exemption does not mean the border will now be open to weekend travelers or those seeking just to attend a personal or social gathering. For people traveling from abroad, they must still have a valid visa or electronic travel authorization. The purpose of this measure is not to allow people to come and go into Canada whenever they like, but rather to help Canadian families reunite during this unprecedented time. Today's announcement represents a responsible step, an incremental step, one that we will monitor carefully as we continue to maintain the integrity of our borders. Aujourd'hui, je suis heureux d'annoncer
Today, I'm pleased to announce an exemption to the immediate families of Canadian citizens and permanent residents, but only if they wish to enter Canada for a minimum of 15 days. Immediate family members will be defined as follows: spouses, common law spouses, dependent children and their children, parents, and legal guardians. Allow me to be very clear. Public health requirements remain in place. Any person exempted will have to be quarantined for 14 days after entering the country. This does not mean that the borders will be open to travelers for a weekend or those who want to come into the country to attend an event. This measure is put in place to help Canadian families reunite and not to allow people to come and go as they please.
In closing, COVID-19 remains a concern, and we must continue to take measures at the border that are necessary from spreading it, and the measures today represent an incremental, a responsible, and a thoughtful response towards that objective. Thank you. Merci.
Merci, Marco, pour cette annonce.
Thank you for this important announcement about family reunification when they are Canadian citizens or permanent residents. We're now very pleased to answer your questions.
Thank you, Minister. As usual, we'll start with 3 questions on the phone before we turn to the room. 1 question, 1 follow-up. Operator, over to you.
Thank you. Merci. Please press star 1 at this time if you have a question. S'il vous plaît, appuyez sur étoile 1 maintenant pour poser une question. And the first question, la première question, is from Raymond Fillon de TVA. À vous la parole.
Good afternoon. I have a question for Dr. New. Dr. New, you talked about, and Dr. Tam did mention too, you talked about the importance of maintaining physical distancing and that we're not out of the woods yet. Are you worried about the images you saw of the protests that happened this weekend? Thank you for the question. To my mind, there are 2 important issues here. The first issue, as we know, is that this is a historic moment in Canada, or worldwide, really, as we all recognize the inequalities in our society. Worldwide and in Canada, we see that systemic racism exists, and and there is inequality. I even note, as a public health doctor, that inequality in our society do have an impact on the health of a large portion of the population. So I'm saying this as a specialist in the technical area of public health. Now, what can we do? Of course, there are many ways to show everyone that we recognize that inequality, that something has to be done, the system has to change. And one of the important things in our democracy is the right to protest. I do also understand that demonstrations are happening during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we have to strike a balance. I'm speaking strictly from the standpoint of public health. I've said, and Dr. Tam has repeated many times, what are the important measures that have to be practiced to minimize the risk of catching or being contaminated with COVID-19? That's physical distancing, 2 meters. If that's not possible, use a mask, non-medical mask or a medical mask. Have a lot of hand sanitizer with you, things like that. Therefore, what I've seen in these images is that there were many people who participated in these demonstrations and who wore a mask. In some pictures, I saw that there was quite a good distance between individuals, but honestly, there is a possibility that, given what happened, there is some risk. That's the reality. I think everyone who participated has done a self-evaluation of their own risk. They've taken all measures necessary and possible to be as safe as possible. And that's it. We will see what will happen in the coming weeks. Thank you. Yes, question. I was at the Ottawa demonstration on Parliament Hill Friday. There was no physical distancing in most places. People were very close to each other. Should we expect an increase in the number of cases? Should the Prime Minister, who was present, be tested? Thank you for that question. Answer. As we've said many times, if it's difficult to maintain 2 meters of physical distancing, it's important to use other methods, particularly masks. And what I saw in the photographs and images, there were many people who did have one. That's an additional measure for protection. So for all the demonstrators who took part, I think they must continue to practice good personal public health measures, and it's also a matter of checking for symptoms. We are a bit worried because there is a possibility of exposure. What we know about the incubation period is that normally it takes 5-6 days, maybe a week. So probably isn't a good idea to have a test immediately, because it's possible that even if you are contaminated.
Press conference just briefly. If you want to continue listening, I will come back to it, but it is on CBC.ca. I'll come back to it very shortly. But want to squeeze in an interview here, given the time restrictions from the Premier. We know that there are obviously lots of restrictions being lifted across the country, and it means that there are a wide variety of businesses and activities resuming in the Northwest Territories. Cases of the virus remain relatively low, so the government is also planning more of the reopening of the economy. And Caroline Cochrane is the Premier, and she joins me now from Yellowknife. Good to see you, Premier.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm good. So tell me, when are you moving into Phase 2 in the Northwest Territories? Could it happen as early as this week?
It could happen as early as this week. We went into Phase 1, and then we had to wait for 2 rounds of incubation period to make sure that we had no cases related to community spread. So far we've been fine, and we're talking about opening up to Phase 2.
And what would Phase 2 allow the territory to do?
It allows more businesses to open up, of course, with the proper PPE. It allows people to social gather, more people, allowing up to 50 people into a crowd, again, making sure that they have the social distancing and the mask.
You are doing quite well up there, and it might be obviously because of the nature of the territory, how remote it is, and the way you can control things. How many cases have you had in the past couple of months? Have you had any new cases?
We've had no new cases since we first COVID-19 hit us in early March. We had 5 cases. They were all related to travel. So far, we've had none community spread, so we've been very fortunate that way.
So you've kept your state of emergency in place in the territory in spite of the fact that you have had no new cases. Why are you doing that, Premier?
The state of emergency protects it backs up the Chief Public Health Officer. It keeps us in awareness in case something were to happen, such as price gouging, people refusing to open up a major grocery store, things like that we might need to address in a timely manner.
You've talked about potentially bubbling with the territory of Nunavut. Is that something that is on the table and likely to happen?
Absolutely. Nunavut also has 0 cases. And so we're recognizing that our tourism industry has taken a huge hit. So we're hoping that if we could open up Nunavut, have a travel bubble between Nunavut and the Northwest Territories, that we would allow more people to actually tour to see the North, which would help our tourism business and help the economy within both territories.
Obviously, though, there might be some tourism between the 2 territories, but probably not a whole lot. Are you not considering opening up the territory in a broader sense to other Canadians and hoping that they will come and visit, or even up to workers? Because I know there's a lot of people that move in and out of the territory for work.
Yes, people who come here for work are more than welcome. Of course, they would have to have the self-isolation plans and a work permit. People that come from other jurisdictions are also welcome, but they also need to have a self-isolation plan before they can enter our territory.
So the tourism is really not on the table then for you this summer?
Well, tourism is on the table. I think that it's important to realize that the North has a lot to offer. It's a beautiful, beautiful country up here. We have a more pristine landscape than anywhere in Canada. The North has a lot to offer, and so we are hoping that people will take the advantage and see our beautiful territory.
Yeah, but you'll have to self-isolate when you arrive. Is that?
Unless you're from the territories. If you're from the territory, Northwest Territories or Nunavut, once we open the travel bubble, then you wouldn't have to self-isolate. If you are coming from the south, of course, you would have to self-isolate.
I don't know if you caught the Prime Minister when he came out at 11:15 this morning, Premier. He talked about how this week he plans to discuss body cameras with all of you on your weekly call, and he said that it is in his view probably a good idea for the RCMP to move in that direction. You have had cases of police allegations of police abuse with the RCMP in the territories. Are you? How do you feel about the idea of body cameras?
I think that there's 2 sides of the argument. Of course, Black Lives Matter. We care about, we're 50% Indigenous. So yes. For us, racism is a huge issue. It's something we're always combating. But the RCMP have a tough job as well. It can be very scary at times. So I understand their need for protection. However, the use of body cameras will help the public. It'll not only ensure that the public are being treated properly, it'll regain that social acceptance of the RCMP. People are afraid of them right now. And so anything we can do to make people realize that the RCMP are our friends, that they're there to protect us, and to make sure that they also follow the law. No one is above the law.
How have you been viewing the examples that we've seen over the past number of days, whether it be the shooting of Chantel Moore, New Brunswick, the allegations from Chief Adam over the weekend that he was abused, assaulted by the RCMP? When you see that, Premier, what are you thinking?
I think that there's good and bad in everything. I don't want to use a paintbrush and say that all RCMP are bad. That is totally incorrect. RCMP, like any other profession, come because they care about people. Within every structure, though, there are issues, there's concerns. And so if there's people that are abusing their power, then definitely they need to be removed.
You've been having these weekly calls with the Prime Minister. Can I just ask, is there anything else that the Northwest Territories needs? Because you are in such a different location and have specific needs, is there something that you feel you're not getting or something you need more of?
The Northwest Territories started out with what we call an opportunity gap. It means that we weren't at the same place as our southern jurisdictions. We don't have the health centres, we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the roads to access many of our communities. So COVID-19 hit us off guard right across Canada. It highlighted our need, that we need to be considered not only at the same as our southern jurisdictions, but actually more so. My biggest fear is that we were behind the ball before we started COVID-19, and if we don't get additional federal support, we're going to be really behind and our people will suffer. So it's important that the federal government recognize that we cannot base it on the same per capita funding. It needs to be a special allocation for the North, and also that we need flexibility. Often the funding that's let it go by the federal government doesn't meet our needs, so we need flexibility within that as well.
So the $14 billion that the Prime Minister, the federal government has put on the table, where would you want much of that money or some of that money to go, Premier, for you?
Well, at this point, we haven't gone through it as well. We're still in a beginning negotiations stage. But like I've said to the federal government, we put people into houses, people that were homeless into care. We've increased our childcare supports. How do I take that back? Those are wonderful things that have happened, horrible that had to happen because of COVID-19, but we finally got people into homes and we finally got adequate childcare. How do I take that back? I can't. So those are the things that we're asking for the federal government to consider for us as well. And our need for infrastructure. We need work. We need people to actually have an income in the North. Our cost of living is at least twice as high as in the South.
Premier, good of you to make the time. I know you were squeezed for time today. I appreciate you making the time for us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Okay, you too. Appreciate it. That's Caroline Cochrane. She's the Premier of the Northwest Territories. We are going to zip back now to that briefing by public health officials. Here, though, the Cabinet Minister, the Minister of Immigration, Marco Mendicino.
To creating a family exemption for the immediate family members of Canadian citizens and permanent residents. It ensures that the public health care controls remain in place, so even where this exemption applies, everyone entering under it must still abide by the mandatory 14-day isolation period. And with regards to those immediate family members who are related to those who hold valid visas here, this exemption does not apply. But there is still a residual discretion which looks to assess all of the circumstances and ensures that the purpose of that travel is necessary without in any way compromising the health and safety of Canadians.
Thank you, Minister. We will now turn to the room for questions, starting with Annie from CTV.
Hi. Yeah, I guess I can't take this off. Hi, it's Annie Bergeron-Oliver with CTV National News. My question is for Dr. Tam as well as Minister Mendicino. So we're opening the border today for family reunifications, and you just talked about the need for this 14-day quarantine. However, with rules loosened right across the country in terms of who can get a test, I'm hearing from more and more Canadian international travelers who are getting tested the day they come back into Canada. And if that test is negative, they are skipping the 14-day quarantine. So one, is this accurate, that international travelers, when they land into Canada, if they have a negative test, they no longer have to quarantine? And two, what assurances do you have that Canadians who are coming in or travelers are indeed abiding by that 14-day quarantine rule?
So your initial statement is incorrect. Everyone who comes in who is not exempted, like an essential service worker who's driving a truck who has to go past the border. If you so then everyone is mandated under the Quarantine Act to be in quarantine for 14 days. And we will examine the role of laboratory testing, But if you can imagine, if you test negative on the first day, that doesn't actually mean that you're not actually incubating the virus, because we know the incubation period in general is about 5 or 6 days, but it can be as longer than that. So the Quarantine Act, as it stands, requires that 14-day mandatory quarantine.
Yeah, I have very little to add other than to say that, again, the exemption for immediate family members still must be subject to the rigorous public health care controls which are in place as a means of reducing the risk of transmission for those entering into Canada.
Okay, great. You talked about as well that, a lot of people are asymptomatic and sometimes the test won't pick it up unless you have enough of the viral load. You also mentioned that Canadians should be monitoring themselves for symptoms and keeping an eye on it if they attended any of the rallies across Canada this week. So what is your advice to Canadians who attended those rallies, including the Prime Minister? Would you advise them to remain isolated this week and get a COVID-19 test, in 5 to 7 days?
So I think the advice is monitor your symptoms. However, I think depending on what actually happened to you and, in terms of during the protest, and you're concerned about having been exposed, because people sometimes don't wear their mask properly or they didn't have access to hand washing, etc., and they're concerned, then talk to your public health about getting a test. I know that, for example, in Ontario, so if you're in Ottawa, the Ontario Public Health is open to testing people who are concerned about having been exposed. So I think definitely call the health line and follow the instructions of the local public health about getting a test.
Advise the Prime Minister to get a test?
I don't know his particular circumstances, but he should also evaluate what actually happened to him, monitor his symptoms, and talk to public health and get a test as needed.
Dr. The only thing I would add to that is that even if you did go get a test and it's negative, you're not in the clear, right? Certainly you still need to keep monitoring for symptoms. If you become ill, even after, quote, following a negative test, it's important to talk again to public health and see if that maybe you should get another test, because as Dr. Tam and I mentioned, it's very possible that if you go, quote, at the wrong time, you may well be infected with the virus, but the timing of the test, you end up being negative, then you might have a false sense of assurance saying, oh, I'm good, I don't have, the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and then, bang, 3-4 days later, you do become ill, and then you might think, well, I did have the negative test, so I can have COVID-19, but that might not be the case. So,
thank you, Doctor. Just a friendly reminder, one question, one follow-up. Brian, over to you.
This is a question for Minister Mendicino on temporary foreign workers. Cramped living conditions, working in close proximity, and now 2 deaths. Does Canada need to rethink how to safely deploy temporary foreign workers in farms across the country so they can continue their essential job of putting food on the tables of Canadians? And what specifically can be done?
Well, let me begin by expressing my sympathy to the 2 migrant workers that I'm aware of who have passed away from COVID-19 while coming to Canada to ensure that Canadians can still get access to safe and affordable food. And it goes without saying that we are concerned about the reports of outbreaks on farms and at food processing plants across the country. And we're working very, very closely with our provincial partners as well as the farmers and the employers who welcome the temporary workers. We have put into place a number of investments and supports to ensure that every temporary foreign worker can apply their trade in a safe and healthy environment. We provided $50 million to farmers, which would be distributed to workers, $1,500 per individual. We have also put into place a number of inspection powers so that the Government of Canada, in conjunction with the province, can actually go to these sites and evaluate whether or not the distancing, the accommodations, which were designed to be facilitated by those investments are actually taking place. And I know that representatives from our government, our level of government, are continuing to undertake those inspections. And we will continue to examine ways in which we can raise the level of health and safety in our food processing plants and on our farms, because we know this is very important.
And what's it going to take to make these conditions safer for these workers? Obviously, the cramped living conditions are a concern, but what can be done on the ground to make sure that they're safe?
Well, first and foremost, we need continued collaboration between our level of government and our provincial counterparts, and certainly for my part, but I know as well, Minister Bibeau, Minister Qualtrough, Minister Jordan have all been in very close and consistent touch with their counterparts as well to ensure that we are protecting the health and safety of migrant workers and indeed all Canadians who work on farms. And from that cooperation, we hope to exercise the inspection and the regulatory powers which were brought in as a response to COVID-19, and also to look at ways in which we can deliver the financial support that is necessary to create that space, to create those accommodations which allow workers the distance that they need to abide by the 14-day isolation period, which is one of the cornerstones of our strategy in welcoming temporary residents and indeed all returning travelers to Canada.
Thank you, Minister. Nous allons maintenant retourner au téléphone. Opératrice, prochaine question.
Thank you. Merci. The next question, la prochaine question is from Lauren Gardner from Politico. Please go ahead.
Hi, this question is for Minister Mendicino. Brian Higgins, a congressman in the United States from the Buffalo area, has called for the Canadian and U.S. governments to do more to allow families who are separated by the border to see each other, but also for Americans who own homes in Canada to be able to cross to check on them. Given today's announcement about families being able to see each other, do you have any response to his ask that Americans or those living on this side of the border who do own property in Canada, whether they might be able to, at some point this summer, be able to go check on those properties?
Well, the first thing that I would say is that the current non-essential travel agreement that we have in place with the United States is the product of extensive collaboration between our two governments, which is a reflection of the long-standing relationship and close friendship between our two countries, as well as the border that we share. It's important to note that the exemption that we announced today is very incremental. It's very targeted and focused on immediate family members who have relatives who are Canadian citizens and Canadian permanent residents, as a way to keep them together throughout this very unprecedented time without in any way compromising the health and safety of Canadians while we manage our response to the pandemic. Other examples of travel, like the ones that you've mentioned and the ones that have been discussed south of the border, are not captured by this exemption, and so will still be subject to all of the screens which we have in place in the border, which really attempts to focus the nature of the travel as being essential and non-discretionary.
Lauren, follow up.
Can you clarify the exemption that was announced today? Is that effective immediately, or is this going to be effective come the next deadline in a couple of weeks for the agreement to be renewed?
It's already come into force, and I believe the in effect date is June 5th, and we will verify that for you.
Thank you, Minister. Operator, last question, please.
Thank you. Merci. The last question, la dernière question, is from Catherine Lévesque de la Presse canadienne. À vous la parole.
Question. Thank you. My questions are for Mr. Mendicino. I want to make sure of something. You say that what was announced today has been in effect for 3 days now? I think the clarification here, I'm looking to my team here. The law comes into effect today, tonight. That's the clarification. I apologize. Midnight tonight.
Now they're all looking and nodding.
Okay.
Okay, so to be clear, it comes into effect tonight at midnight, and then people can come into the country starting tomorrow. Another clarification, are we talking about people coming through the American border only, or everywhere in the world where separated family members can come back? And I'm wondering how your government convinced the reluctant provinces like Ontario and Quebec to agree to that exemption at the border. This exemption applies in the context of our agreement with the United States. This is a product of consultations with our experts in public health and with a great deal of discussion and consultation with our partners and our provincial counterparts. Question, so it's only people in the United States who can come back, is that correct? Yes. Thank you, Minister. One last question.
Thank you, merci. The next question, la prochaine question est de Hélène Buzetti du Devoir. À vous la parole.
Question, good morning, Mr. New. I'd like to get back to the question put by my colleagues at TVA with regard to anti-racism demonstrations. What is the recommendation of public health? Should these public demonstrations be avoided? And if you don't give that advice, what do you tell people who complain that they can't go to church, they can't have funerals for their loved ones?
Okay, we're going to pull away from this federal briefing. We've essentially heard that question to Dr. New already, and the question was whether people should be out protesting during a pandemic. His response was people should wear masks and find physical distance when possible, which obviously isn't always possible, but that's a decision people are clearly making based on what they're willing to risk and their own risks and how important that protest is for them. Let's bring back Vashi Kapelis and the CBC's David Cochrane as well to talk through a little bit more of what we heard. I'll just sort of recap what we heard there from the Minister of Immigration, that those measures go into effect as of midnight tonight that will allow some families to be reunited, Vashi.
Yeah, so that is the main sort of COVID-related announcement from the federal government today, and it is that as of midnight, if you are an immediate family member of a Canadian citizen or permanent resident and you're not exhibiting, and this is important, any COVID-19 related symptoms, or don't have any reason to believe that you might have contracted the virus, you'll be exempt from the restrictions that are currently in place at the border. And of course, those restrictions are unless your travel is essential, so it has nothing to do with leisure or travel, period, you cannot cross the border. And so this provides an exemption, as you said, at midnight. And there's a list, and I'm sure our website will have it soon, of exactly who, what an immediate family member means. So it's a spouse or common law partner or a dependent child or a parent or step-parent or a guardian or a tutor. Basically, that's the summary of the list, but I'm sure the exact wording will be up shortly. That is obviously, as Minister Mendocino said, in the context of the bigger agreement with the United States that was just renewed a few weeks ago for another 30 days, and that's the general timeline of the agreement each time it gets renewed. This is really the first sort of relaxing of those restrictions, though, so keen to see what that means. Also important that you have to self-isolate, as anyone does when you cross the border for 14 days. That remains a strong caveat to this exemption.
Yeah, so it doesn't mean you can go and visit your family in Canada or the United States.
Immediately.
No, that's not what this is about. This is about reuniting people who were maybe cut off during the pandemic and need to see one another in those particular circumstances you outlined there. And David, maybe we'll just end on body cameras, because we did, that was what the Prime Minister talked about today, and it was what I put to the Premier of the Northwest Territories, who seemed very much open to the idea as well, while recognizing that there are some limitations, obviously, to it, but that it might be a welcome addition to the RCMP in her territory.
Yeah, I'm being told by people at the senior levels of the government that the body camera endorsement by the Prime Minister today will be the first in a series of concrete steps on improving policing and race relations and the confidence of racialized Canadians and Indigenous Canadians in policing. The specifics of that we don't really know, but you can look broadly at things like better civilian review, race-based stats on arrests, and then an emphasis on the use of force de-escalation. But the body cam endorsement by the Prime Minister, an important first step on that. that. It's not definite, it's not done. They need to figure out the logistics and the finances of this and raise it with the premiers to see how it trickles down to provincial and municipal levels, and also for RCMP officers who are contracted to work for provincial government. So it's not a super quick and easy thing they can do, but the Prime Minister's throwing his weight behind it. That's something that matters.
Okay, thank you both very much for your coverage today. Vashi Kapelis, you can watch her at 5 Eastern on Power and Politics, and David Cochrane from our Parliamentary Bureau. Thank you both so much. Appreciate it. And that ends our coverage here today for our COVID-19 special. A lot of the talk today really about policing. We'll have more of that through the day as the Prime Minister meets with Cabinet later today. I'm Rosemary Barton. CBC News Network continues with Andrew Nichols right now.